All right, thank you for coming in to the panel room. I've got a panel today about Afrofuturism and Cyberpunk. So before we get started, let's go ahead and go around the room and get everyone to introduce themselves and their relevant history, with the genre. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Jeff.
All right. My name is Jeff Carroll. I am a science fiction writer for over 12 years, and I do film and comic books as well. My first cyberpunk story, I'm going to say, was actually in Milton Davis's The City.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a story called Dreamer's Recall, which I got a chance to continue in the second book. And I'm actually writing a third and a fourth part to make it a full novella or maybe even a short novel. But I love cyberpunk as a genre, especially since the game, the movie Akira, and the cyberpunk energy, which really is still more loved than it is fully displayed. But I like the Blade Runner comic book more than the Blade Runner movies.
All right, perfect. Milton, how about you?
Okay, I'm Milton Davis. I am a author and owner of MV Media, science fiction and fantasy company specializing in science fiction and fantasy by African diaspora writers and culture and tradition. I write a little bit of everything when it comes to the speculative fiction genre. Like Jeff, I'm a big cyberpunk fan, although I must say my cyberpunk is more from a visual aspect than from the actual books. I think the only cyberpunk books I've read have been by Nicole and Ceres, actually. but I'm heavily influenced by the movies and by the anime, especially Ghost in the Shell. To me, Ghost in the Shell is like the cyberpunk standard as far as I'm concerned. So,
all right, Nicole.
So my name is Nicole Kurtz, and I'm the owner of Mocha Memoirs Press. Our mission, of course, is to amplify marginalized voices in speculative fiction. I also write a cyberpunk futuristic noir series called the Sybil Lewis series. And I tend to write cyberpunk stories where the value of human life doesn't rank quite as high as the technology does. I am a huge cyberpunk fan. I am a big fan of Richard K. Morgan's Kovac series, which you guys saw in Altered Carbon. I also like William Gibson's work, who's kind of like the inventor of cyberpunk. I also am a big fan of Philip K. Dick, who is also a big participant and contributed a lot to the cyberpunk genre, and like there were things like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Minority Report, and a few other lots of A Scanner Darkly, lots of titles like that. I too enjoy cyberpunk in its anime form, so I also like Ghost in the Shell. I also like Akira. I also like things like Psycho Deck and a few others, but that's kind of like why I'm on this panel, because I'm a big fan, and I don't think cyberpunk gets the kind of love and attention that some of the other subgenres get, and I like to sing its praises and bring new readers or watchers to the genre.
All right, perfect. And finally, Ceres.
Hi, I'm Ceres Wright. I'm president of the organization known as Diverse Writers and Artists of Speculative Fiction. We're a support and educational group for writers and artists of diverse speculative fiction. I came to cyberpunk late because Neuromancer was written in '84. I didn't read it until 2003, and I was just enthralled with the writing, and I wanted to write a short story. So I wrote one and I put it online, and people said they liked it. So I said, well, I want to write a book, but I didn't know how to write a book. So I went to Seton Hill University's Writing Popular Fiction program, and I wrote COG, which was eventually published. I love cyberpunk. I write mostly short stories because I have ADD and I want to hurry up and get the story over with so I can move on to something else.
Right.
I have some short stories in The City, published by Milton Davis, Sycorax's Daughters. That's more like a sci-fi horror. And, you know, I love Blade Runner and even Fifth Element, I would think had elements. But I think cyberpunk has really influenced the science fiction genre as a whole. And I look forward to talking about it today.
All right, perfect. So I'll go ahead and start my first question with you, Milton. Let's talk a little bit about Afrofuturism, you know, going back out a little bit because, you know, cyberpunk and cyberfunk are, as Nicole mentioned, subgenres. So kind of give us an overview of what the Afrofuturism is and, in your opinion, what it takes for a story to be considered Afrofuturism.
Whew.
Just an easy one to start, right?
Yeah. Well, for me, Afrofuturism in itself, to me, basically started as a explanation of what was happening years ago with people like Sun Ra and Earth, Wind, and Fire, who were basically, you know, expressing, you know, African American culture, and they were including science fiction and different aspects of that. If you would have talked to them at that time, they would not have labeled it that. As far as they were concerned, they were just basically doing science fiction, and they were adding an Afrocentric element to it. You know, all of us grew up during that time of Earth, Wind, and Fire, and their album covers where they were meshing like Egyptian symbolism with, you know, science fiction and different things like that. And I think it was Derry's way of trying to explain what was happening, and where he gave it, you know, his interpretation was Afrofuturism. I think today the term is being used as a blanket term to cover all aspects of African diaspora expression, from science fiction, from, you know, steampunk, from you know, diesel funk, there's sword and sorcery, sword and soul. It's just basically being used as a blanket term to cover all those different things. For me, when I think about the word Afrofuturism, I'm thinking about an Afrocentric influence or interpretation in the future. You know, it's very specific for me. And I think it applies to what we create from that aspect. I probably would consider cyberpunk being a subgenre of Afrofuturism. But there's other things that I think is being created now that I don't personally feel would fall under that blanket. But you know, but like a friend of mine says, I don't care what you call it as long as you buy it. So, but that's my interpretation of it.
All right, great. Nicole.
So I agree with Milton on a few points, and that Afrofuturism has become a bit of a genre in and of itself. And so it all is starting to spring out subgenres that kind of fall underneath it, in the same way that steampunk falls under science fiction, right? Or sword and sorcery falls under fantasy. But I definitely think that it is. So I think about Basquiat. I think about Lord, her name just went out of my head. She wrote Supercomputer, and what is her name? It just left my brain. Sorry. So it's definitely not. I think Afrofuturism is not confined to just literature. And Milton hinted at that. It's very much music. It's art. It's definitely expressive in music and art in ways long before it was applied to like literature and text. I do think too that there are some things that are getting kind of painted with that brush of being Afrofuturism, but kind of isn't quite. Like I am a big horror writer and fan, and so I don't think that horror belongs under the umbrella of Afrofuturism, because I think of Afrofuturism as specifically Afrocentric ideas, expression, culture, reinterpreted in a futuristic setting. And so I think depending on what type of cyberpunk or cyberpunk you write, it may fit under Afrofuturism or it may not. Because it depends on, for me, it depends on how far in the future it is. Is it near future? Is it 5 years out, or is it 500 years out, right? So I think there are some nuances with it, but again, my definition is not, canon, right? So it's just my personal interpretation of what I think it means.
All right. Ceres, what are your thoughts?
I define Afrofuturism as a cultural aesthetic that combines elements of science fiction, fantasy, horror, magical realism, to both examine and revise the past and present experiences of the African diaspora. I mean, our history was taken from us, and writers and artists can look back and we can reimagine what happened, and tell those stories that are missing from our culture. I think when does it start? I think of the Dogon, who are African people of the central plains of Mali, and their traditional folklore says that they came, a race called the Namo came to them from the Canis Major constellation around the star Sirius B. They said that Sirius B was a dense star and it revolved around Sirius every 50 years. Of course, Western astronomers think that they had knowledge of this from Western astronomers who would talk to them, and they incorporate it into their ceremonial pageantry. But they have a relic of a mass that's at least 400 years old with the star Sirius and the star Sirius B. And I'm not calling it fiction, but I'm thinking that's one of the first examples of Afrofuturism because of the folklore and the pageantry and the ceremony that they have in order to give homage to this belief of theirs. So there's been a vast history of Afrofuturism that has not been tapped into. I don't think it's been recognized. And I think today we're just discovering it and we're reimagining it into different outlets: art, music, stories, fashion. And I think it's a great thing.
Perfect. Jeff, your thoughts?
While I love the term aesthetic, I am sort of against it per se, because I believe that Afrofuturism, including cyberpunk, is more of a tool than just an aid. And even though aesthetics can be tools, I think it's more of a tool than we like it to be embraced. I think that comes from listening to Milton too much, and not being afraid to say that my vision is a closed, narrow vision, in the sense that, I do embrace a lot of political direction in there. And I think, having it being a story that extends from the politics of Africa and its people is a foundation. And that, to me, is more of an aesthetic than a fashion item. Even though I think fashion can be political and useful, I just don't think we do that as much as it has been done in the past. I hope I didn't lose everybody. But I define it as a interwoven future analysis of the intersection between politics, technology, and an African experience, all things African in its modern diasporic interpretation. That means how it experiences itself in the Caribbean, the Americas, in the Europe, as well as pre colonialized Africa or traditional Africa and post-colonial Africa, and how all of that interacts with technology and world politics. So there you have it.
All right, thank you. Now this kind of goes off of that a little bit, and I'll start with you, Nicole, on this one. A lot of genres, you're able to, there's enough focus on the character that it could take place just about anywhere. But with the cyberpunk subgenre, is it possible to do that without knowing, as a writer, the history behind it? Can you fake it?
So just like any other genre, there are certain beats that need to happen in a cyberpunk story, I think. As long as you know what those beats are, right, that makes that story a cyberpunk story. For example, there has to be high tech. And if you look at every example of cyberpunk, the technology is very high. The people, though, and their worth are very low. Even if you think about Ghost in the Shell, which Milton said was a very high example, there's a lot of tech, right? There's a lot of, but people's especially their individuality, doesn't seem to count for much. Because technology is so much more significant, right? Same thing with altered carbon. Kovacs can slip into any sleeve, right? And live for as long as he needs to, or go on ice, or live for, or be immortal, which was the whole basis of the first book, Altered Carbon. You see that the individuality doesn't really matter. People and what makes us human, what does that mean? In an era of high technology, it tends to be that the technology matters more than individual lives do. And so as long as you can put that type of story, the setting, I feel like Blade Runner kind of messed everybody up because everybody thinks that a cyberpunk story needs to look like Blade Runner. And there's actually been articles written about how the aesthetics, sorry, Jeff, and the setting for Blade Runner has become like a blueprint for every dark, noir, science fiction film after that, which is kind of why I think people love The Fifth Element so much, because it's so bright and shiny, and it's still cyberpunk, right? So I think that setting notwithstanding, I don't think setting matters quite as much as what you do with tech and what you do with the people who are using that tech, or the society you build around that tech. Does that make that's what I think. So I think you can fake it as long as you hit those beats.
All right. Ceres.
I would say you can try to fake it, but I don't think it'd be very good.
I didn't say it'd be good. I said you can do it.
But I agree with everything Nicole said. I think there's also a pacing in a story. You know, it comes fast and furious, and you got to use your wits to figure stuff out. And you can't take the time for an info dump to explain it. I've had non-cyberpunk fans read my work, and they're like, well, you need to explain this. And I'm saying, no, you figure it out. That's just the way it is. The writing has to be tight. At least I prefer it to be, because that's how William Gibson wrote it. I'm sorry, Neil Stevenson. I tried to read Snow Crash, and it was just pages and pages of narrative descriptive, and I couldn't. And, you know, you have your alienated anti-hero. I didn't really identify with Case in Neuromancer, but I love the book. So, and I was in a writing program at the time, and I said, you know, all the teachings were like, well, everybody has to like your character. And I said, no, I don't like this main character, but the book is awesome. And so I think that's different for cyberpunk. You also have your declining nation states. The boundaries between nation states are blurring because of corporations that exact transactions across boundaries, and corporations that are even acting as corrupt governments because they're setting policy, they're paying off people, you know, they're doing what they want to do, and that affects society. So you have all these different elements, whether people know it or not, it has to be some kind of form in a cyberpunk book to me, whether it's near future or far future, like Richard K. Morgan. But yeah, high tech, low life, that's the general definition.
All right. Jeff?
I agree with everybody. I just will apply my little sub amendment and say, something that is from the African perspective, which is not always the same use of technology and politics that is central to the Western cyberpunk narrative. It's a little bit more. I'll give you an example. When I tried to write steampunk, the Victorian principles were very dominant. Now I embraced the aesthetics of the steampunk and got into the fashion and I got into the technology, but the structure of the emperor and the queen, and that was something that was very difficult for me because coming out of the African model, our kings and queens are not exchangeable. We don't view them the same. So when it comes to a futuristic narrative, I don't always see coming from an African standpoint, the similar dystopian future that is dominant in the Western view. And I think there's a story there just as well as the story is with a totalitarian V for Vendetta type of oppressive government. I still think there's going to be challenges working things around a technological world which is extremely overpopulated. I don't know if you all consider Judge Dredd cyber punk, but it is sort of cyberpunk-ish, especially the comic books are a lot more than the movies that they made. So I see things like that. We still will have problems. They stem from overpopulation. They stem from multiple varieties of government, but sometimes the villains are not necessarily the government, as it is in cyberpunk and cyber. So cyberpunk and maybe cyberfunk should not have that either, although some people do.
So I think that Judge Dredd and V for Vendetta are just dystopian stories. They hit those dystopian beats, an oppressive government, marginalized groups, a very small elite populace that runs everything. That doesn't hit cyberpunk because, again, what the very definition of cyberpunk is, high tech, low life. So if there's no high tech, and I mean, that tech has to be integrated into everybody's life, into every single pore of everybody's existence. And so if that isn't there, I can't count that as cyberpunk, but it does. Dread and V for Vendetta hits all those characteristics that define a dystopian story. Just, I used to teach dystopian stories. So.
All right. Milton.
Well, for me, I focus on, to me, the thing that's the central point about cyberpunk is the mesh between technology and the human body itself. That was the thing that fascinated me so much about Ghost in the Shell, was actually after I watched Ghost in the Shell and I listened to the creator's explanation of what he was trying to do, I basically said, I'm watching this thing and I'm like, man, this is amazing. People are getting hacked and they're having conversations when they're hooking wires, and it was such a mesh between, humanity and technology that I just said, I'm not going to write in cyberpunk. This guy's done everything. He's thought of it 100%, every kind of angle you could possibly do with this stuff. He's done it. There's no reason for me to touch this, because it was just the way. And to me, that was the biggest thing that he said, is that I think he said the thing for him was trying to answer, what is humanity? At what point does an android become a human? Or at what point does an enhanced human become an android? You know, where is the humanity in, you know, in it? And that was, to me, that was the core of cyberpunk to me. The technology, and that was one of the issues I had with my anthology that we're working on, Cyberpunk, is that there were some people that didn't grasp that technology part of it, that had to be there, that had to be that combination of, you know, of let's say, I guess, working toward the singularity, as people call it, that had to be there. I'm not very locked in on the whole corporate dominated future thing. I know that's one of the things there, but whenever I try to approach something, my thing is, okay, that's how everybody else is doing it. What can we bring to it that's going to be different from that? Does cyberpunk have to be dark? And I know some people will say, okay, now you're talking about solar punk because solar punk is bright and happy. But but I'm thinking at the same time, when you look at an area, when you look at, say, for instance, Blade Runner, or you look at Altered Carbon, there's somebody in that world that's actually having a great time.
Yes.
I mean,
yes, living life, loving it.
Right? And they're cloud
technology and stuff like that, and they're living in this world and it's having a good time, you know. And so how does that, you know, how does it look when you step away from that? You know, the main characters in all these stories are dealing with something that's really important to the core of their world and how things are going on. And that's the kind of stuff we like to read. But in every situation, there are people that are just living their lives and they're taking this technology and they're doing whatever they got to do with it, and they're making ends meet and stuff like that. And to me, those stories are the ones that are more interesting to me. As far as cyberpunk is concerned, to me, cyberpunk can be as simple as having Black characters, because as we all know, that's something that's very rare in cyberpunk and in all aspects of science. You know, that's why, you know, I love Ceres and Nicole's story so much, because, you know, and it, just like when we described steampunk, we said there were stories where the characters happen to be Black, and there were stories where the characters have to be Black,
right?
Because those stories deal with a specific condition or a situation that people of the African diaspora or people from Africa are dealing with. That's what those storylines are essential for those particular characters. But when we look at the future, the question is, people of African descent, are we still going to be dealing with those kind of problems?
Right.
100, 200, 300 years from now? Are we mainly going to be dealing with situations and stories where the characters are just dealing with stuff that are affecting them personally because of their situation or their status or something like that? You know, is that going to come? And I think the stories can be told both ways. But I think the fact that we are bringing in that Afrocentric aesthetic when we talk about cyberpunk opens up storytelling. And like Jeff says, you know, when we look at cyberpunk, we're mainly looking at it from a Western point of view.
Yep.
But if we're, which is like some of the stuff that is happening on the continent right now, some of the stuff that's happening with African futurism, you know, we have people now looking at science fiction from an African-centered perspective, and not so much African-centered, but even a cultural, from a Yoruba perspective,
right,
Zulu perspective, from a Maasai perspective, and all these people are bringing in stories from their particular cultures that affect how the stories are being told. I say, for instance, is one thing that I noticed, and I've said this a couple of times, is that when I look at some of the science fiction that's being written by African authors from different countries, we don't see that, like they said, we don't see that same us against them alien scenario. What you're seeing in a lot of the stories coming from these different countries are a situation where aliens are appearing and there's an actual mesh between the cultures. The aliens aren't coming to take over. You know, they're appearing, and what's happening is that there's becoming a mesh of cultures that both cultures are coming together in some kind of way. District 9 is a bad example of that, but it's kind of the same thing.
That's a horrible movie. I hate that movie.
But you still have that situation where there's where these cultures are kind of coming together and stuff. Even like I said, it's terrible. It's supposed to be really an example of apartheid you know, but basically
That's the analogy, but it's a horrible analogy.
I think that there's when you start looking at things from other cultures, that also expands the storytelling, you know, and the aesthetic, and whether the story should be interpreted a certain way. And I think that's what opens up everything.
So Milton said, "Oh, go ahead."
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
With the issues of racism that we're dealing with in today's world, if you can change your looks by downloading into another sleeve, whether it be Asian or white or black, or how that would affect racism in a future world.
Kovac struggles with that initially, being re-sleeved into a white man's body. He struggles with that. And not only that, but it's the body that doesn't fit him, right? It's taller, it just doesn't, he's not comfortable. He's like, right. He's like, what? it's like being in a really bad suit. And so he struggles with that initially, right? And the Netflix version of Altered Carbon gave us an interesting, you know, where the grandmother gets re-sleeved in like this biker body. Right. It's like, and so there's an awkwardness. But to get back to Milton's point, and Milton, you said something that I had said earlier, and I want to thank you for that, is that Cyberpunk talks about that humanity, right? That and that's kind of the thing that science fiction as a genre tends to explore, right? What makes us human? Right? What makes us, where does your humanity lie when you are on a spaceship facing all these other internet, right? Where does your humanity, right, lie when part of you is cybernetic, right? Or all of you, in the case of Data, is an android, or you can re-sleeve like and live for 1,000 years. Where does your humanity lie when death is no longer, you know, people do things because they want to put things right before they die, but where does your humanity lie when that's not even an option for you anymore?
I've got a question for you.
That's the most important part of me to science fiction is in cyberpunk, and cyberpunk is, you know, how does the technology affect your, I like the story that shows how the technology affects your daily life, not the stories that are just focused on the technology,
right?
But the story that, okay, we have this technology, so how is this affecting your daily life? I think Minority Report was a perfect example of
that.
You know, seeing how these different technologies will affect the decisions that you make and stuff like that. And I think that's to me, that's the most interesting part of what we create when we create these different cultures.
That's another Philip K. Dick story too. But I like how, Milton, you're talking about scaling it down, right? Not having these big epic adventures like you have with, I do detectives. I do pulp noir detectives that are in a cyberpunk world, right? But I do like Milton's stories, and I've read a few, that center on your average Joe, right? Not your police captain, not your cop, not your, you know, Section 9, just your average person living with this technology in this area, right? And trying to deal in this is the world we live in. I think that was the appeal too of The Fifth Element. He's just a taxi driver.
Well, here, let me throw a couple of things out at you, Nicole. And I'm gonna I use the V as a throwaway example, mostly because of, you know, I love the time of the year that it takes place right near our election day, you know. But I'm gonna bring back Judge Dredd to you with one example. When we look at cyberpunk and cyberfunk potentially in video games, right? And not dealing with Cyberpunk 2020 or 2077.
Okay.
Right. I'm talking about another game like Deus Ex. And I don't know if you're familiar with that video game, but it gives you endless amounts of augmentations. Fingernails, down to fingernails to eyeballs. So when you think of Ghost in the Shell, Milton, this video game that my son kind of turned me on to gives you not just different type of bullets like in Judge Dredd right? Which in his own principle is futuristic. You have an ability to determine end of somebody's life as a police officer, and that is your job, not what they do now, but your job is to be the judge on the street.
Right.
That is a futuristic look. So Deus Ex, which is in comic books now, and they have novel tie-ins, explores it from that technological aspect, which is sort of different than Altered Carbon, which explores it from the human aspect, but even weapons and implants and all of that Ghost in the Shell stuff is still extensions of your human expression. It's just that they put it around an action James Bond secret agent sort of storyline. So I like that too. I mean, I'm cheap. I like kung fu movies. So if my cyberpunk comes in the way of a lot of fighting, a lot of technology and action, I will have the human experience watching it.
I definitely think that so here's the thing with genres, they kind of blend, right? So they kind of bleed over. It's like state lines. You don't just walk and be like, oh wait, I'm in Kansas, and suddenly you're in a whole nother place. It still looks like the other 2 inches on the other side of the road, right? So but I think genres are like that too. I just think it's really important to remember that within the confines of cyberpunk, that the technology can be really high, but if people's lives are not affected by that high technology, to where it's high, remember it's high tech, low life. Low life means you don't matter. The general populace doesn't matter, right? What matters is the tech or the corporation, as Ms. Wright said earlier, right? So I definitely think that, and that's a very stringent definition, but we can totally play with that. Milton does it beautifully in Playing the Odds, right? It just, and no, Carnival was fantastic playing with that.
Carnival was an experiment. I told Nicole when I wrote, I said, I want to write a cyberpunk story where nobody gets killed.
It's not dark.
It's basically about a guy throwing a party. That's basically what it's about. But how he does it incorporates the elements of cyberpunk.
Yep.
He has stuff incorporated into him that for him is an everyday thing. He's got computers inside his skin and stuff like that, and different things like that are going on. And he's hacking systems and everything like that kind of stuff. But it was an experiment. I didn't. I'm like, how do I make something cyberpunk but not make it dark?
But it's still punk. I think we got to talk about that too, right? It's still punk. Punk is a rebellion. Right. Yeah. And so I think, Jeff, like, you're right too, in the sense that they have all this in Deus Ex, they have it, but it's also a rejection or a rebellion or a fight against whatever the reigning belief or corporation is. And that's why when you look at like Ghost in the Shell, like the Individual 11, right, or the Puppet Master, Section 9 is also fighting against these things that are intrinsic in their society that are problematic for people. Yeah. It's a security breach, right? But think about the Individual 11, and it causes the major problems, right? Because she agrees with the Individual 11, but she's also required to take them down. And so I think those are the things.
And the major is the ultimate, because she basically downloads herself into the internet, basically.
Yep.
She just I guess say occupies android bodies when she needs to do anything physically. But she just exists as an entity in the internet, in their internet, basically.
And in the manga, after she leaves Section 9, she becomes a part of the internet. She no longer downloads herself to anything physical. She's gone. She's everywhere, which is very strange. But yeah. So where is your humanity when you are actually, AOL? Or like, who are you? What defines you when you are? So these are very interesting questions. And if I agree with Milton, and I think even though Carnival, no one dies and it's not dark and it's a party, it still raises very interesting questions around what does it mean to be a human being? What are you willing to sacrifice? right? They're very, those themes still show up. Those still things that Philip K. Dick talks about. Those things that Richard K. Morgan teases out about technology and humanity and how can we play nice together. Those things still show up in Milton's story, even though no one dies there, even though there is an evil corporation, but but
Yeah.
they're not oppressive and they don't play too large in the story because it's not about that. It's about this guy who wants to throw a party. And so I definitely think there's room for growth in cyberpunk and in cyberpunk specifically, because those stories are not stories. Those are our stories. We'll throw the hell out of a block party, right? Like just impromptu. It's Friday. Y'all want to get together? Yeah, we doing it. And it's a block party. So there are so many things about that. And I'm sorry, Milton, I should shut up and let you talk about your own story instead of me gushing about it.
I'm not gonna say anything else because I want to read it, but yeah, it's I just think that there's more to it. The reason I want to do it and the reason I do it is because I want to expand that definition of it and expand that interpretation of it. And you have the basic, and I have written some what I would call straight line cyberpunk stories. But I think that the whole reason to brand something, to give it a name, to call it steampunk or cyberpunk, is to look at that foundational genre and say, how do I change it? How do I expand the definition of it? How do I bring in my experiences as a Black American, and sometimes in general, sometimes specifically, and to this particular work, and tell a story that connects to Black readers, and as my focus, but at the same time, it's telling a good story. So,
question for you, Nicole, and I feel it's like it goes.
Just the moderator now.
I'm sorry.
No.
You made me think of something, right? Because I'm an action story guy, so I really love that element. But I'm forgetting, because you can I liked Total Recall, but the world was so background. It was in sporadic scenes in the story, but it wasn't the main element of the story. And I think, again, that's how Judge Dredd does it. But I also wanted to throw out to you Alita Battle Angel. I think that fits it because you do have your corporation, right?
Oh yeah, that's straight cyberpunk right there.
No, it is. It is.
So that you have the rebellion going on in there. And then I was also say I was heavily, especially with the city, was heavily influenced by the Matrix.
Yes.
And even though the background of the story is all technology, the basic parts of the telling of the story, you're in the Matrix, so you don't really see all of the technology that they deal with when they come out of the Matrix. So that's another one that really heavily influenced me.
And the humans are just fodder at that point. So that
completely low life. Completely low life.
So going on, this kind of goes off what all you guys have been talking about, but we see in science fiction like Star Trek, where technology cures hunger, poverty, all these things, this bright, bright future that it brings. And then we've got cyberpunk, where you've got, Blade Runner, as Nicole said, that kind of influences the way people see it. But Shadowrun, the role-playing game, and the books and games, everything that followed. Matrix, like you said, Ready Player One could possibly be listed as cyberpunk. What is it about this, high-tech, low life that draws people and resonates with them? And I'll start with you, Ceres.
I would say cyberpunk came out of the new wave in the 60s, where they focused on inner man and not outer space. And not having everything gleaming like they did in the golden age came sort of as a rebellion against the postmodern. So I think we live in a postmodern society. Our mentality is geared toward that. It's geared toward the rich being rich, doing what they want to do, and oppressing people who don't have the assets they do, the poor people. I think where a lot of people live in a dystopia. There's a lot of hunger. There's a lot of, as William Gibson said, there's a lot of technology, but it's unevenly distributed. People don't have a lot, and they resonate with that. And people, who have empathy for other people can resonate with that as well. The challenge is to reflect that accurately in your writing from a perspective of the diaspora, what kind of experiences Black people specifically have, and to just own it, I think.
All right. Jeff.
Oh shoot, I forgot the question. I went.
Why does cyberpunk resonate, with its high tech, low, and you guys have been pretty much discussing it, but I kind of wanted to go a little deeper.
I hate to say, have you been to America lately? Okay. Okay. Try to move around saying anything, but there's a looming threat that we have in our world culture pretty much, but very prominent here in America, that technology is, and the future of man is both potentially good and both potentially bad, which makes it extremely interesting. And the closer technology becomes visibly powerful to the average person, the more they're going to get into it. Like, I'll give you an example. I was into Star Wars at 11 years old, right? That's not cyberpunk, but some of the worlds are, right? Some of the worlds, some of the planets are, okay? But at that age, I had friends that could not get into the Matrix until they were in their 30s, okay? And they needed to see the cell phone. They needed to see the internet. They couldn't get into Tron, right? And I was playing Tron video game. I think now we're in such a futuristic world, or a technological world, the ability for people to see a potential domination by technology is there. Somewhere I just saw some conspiracy theorists talking about, what type of job do you have? Is it a job that computers can take over? It reminds me of like iRobot. You know what I'm saying? What makes you so darn better than us? But I think that's the reality. And then, of course, we all know the political element of potential totalitarian. I mean, I'm not going to talk like a Cuban from Miami, but the potential of having a socialist or a technologically dominant world with big government is something that people are dealing with in their minds as much as people are dealing with global warming. And that's why, because it's real to them. Sometimes I don't even feel like I'm writing far off in the future. It feels like I'm writing somewhere else going on right now. When I went to China, it felt like I was in the cyberpunk story.
And I think also people, they may not be able to afford the house, but they can afford the cell phone. Right. And in the future, you won't be able to afford a flying car, but maybe you can get a memory enhancement implant. Yeah. So you have all these high-tech things that through the scale of economy, they're right. cheaper than the traditional show of wealth you have with
like Strange Days, right?
Yeah.
or Repo Men, where you got to give that
All right.
heart.
Get that heart back. Time's up. You didn't make your payment.
That payment.
It's got to come out.
I think it's
That's
just
another one.
I think it's just the traditional underdog story, you know, because in a lot of your cyberpunk stories, you got a person that's basically going against the system, you know, and the system, and a lot of us feel like there's nothing we can do about the system the way it is. So it's nice to see these stories where the oppressive upper class is even heightened even more. And then this person comes along that's probably considered even less, and they end up doing something that's significant or something that, you know, ends up affecting the entire world and stuff like that. And I think, you know, some people, you know, get some vicarious enjoyment from seeing that, because they like say, well, in my life, I'm going to go to work every day and do the same old thing, and I can't change anything. But I'm going to watch this movie or read this book where I'm going to see a person that's in a situation that's even worse than mine or more exaggerated than mine. But in the end, you know, they've accomplished something. They've done they've done their thing for the little person, and, you know, and they've made a little difference despite all these other things that are going on around them and stuff. I think that's why some people like to, you know, they get into that, you know, because they can see that, they can see themselves in that situation and stuff.
I definitely think that's the case with my Sybil Lewis series. I mean, Sybil's a PI, basically. She's like a female Shaft in this dark future where people can't go to the police, right? So they go to her. And so she resolves those issues, whatever their issue might be, whether it's find a missing person or whether it's recover a lost or stolen heirloom. But what that looks like in the future, right? In this post-apocalyptic DC. But she definitely does that in this, and there's like a lot of, but that she's the underdog, right? The regulators hate hate PIs. She's definitely not living the best life. She's constantly about to be evicted. So I can see that, Milton. That's a good point.
But Jason, you mentioned about Star Trek, where you have a future where everything's great. I think that's interesting because you have this advanced technology, and somewhere along the lines, you have to make a decision on what to do with it. And I think about this all the time. I said, when computers were invented, you know, you had a choice. You could either set up a system where that computer would allow you to create an environment where people could actually end up doing the same amount of work they were doing 8 hours a day and in 4 hours, and have 4 hours and only have 4 hour days. But our decision was, okay, we got this computer now, so this person can do 16 hours of work in 8 hours. So it's almost like we get the technology, but because of our society and our mentality and how we think about things, we use the technology to increase the wealth. And instead of using it as an advantage to make life easier, we're using it as a way to just squeeze more out of, you know, what we could have, you know, what we had before. And to me, it's one of the things that I think about when I'm looking at cyberpunk, and then one of the storylines that I'm writing, like the one that Playing the Arts is in. You have a situation where you have a society that has decided that we're going to take this technology and we're going to use it to make everybody's life better. Mm-hmm. It's almost like some people say the European thing is that European people work to live and Americans live to work. You know, in this particular society, they're saying we're going to take this technology and we're going to maximize it to make everybody's life better, to what everybody, you know, is, you know, nobody's homeless. Nobody has to worry about paying healthcare, you know, because we've got the technology to make this happen. And that's going to be our focus. And so when people have, and my thing was that when people have more time and they're not spending time working all the time, then what do they focus on? They focus on the arts. They focus on recreation. You know, that's one of the things that leads to carnival, because in this scenario, the most important thing in this world now is carnival. And every city wants to give the best carnival, that kind of thing. Because, you know, you don't worry about where you if you're going to eat tomorrow. You're going to eat. You don't worry about whether you got a home to go to. You're gonna go. You have a home to go to, and so to me it's a cultural choice. We've chosen one path, but there's another path I feel like you can choose with all this technology available that would be better for people, and that's apparently what the people in the world of Star Trek did. They said, we're going to use this technology to make the world and make living better for everybody, that kind of thing. But that also means that there's a level playing. That means you don't have the very high highs, which we love, because we love it. I know y'all remember the TV show Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous, where we would sit there and watch people with, about $55 million yachts and say, wow, while we're eating our Vienna sausages.
They have a whole channel devoted to that now. It's called A Wealth of Entertainment.
They do not.
If you have Verizon, it's on 169.
Wow.
But I think it's a cultural choice, and I think like that's a possibility. That's something that as we explore cyberpunk and stuff like that we look at those different scenarios instead of looking at this future where the rich will get extremely richer and poor will get poorer, and the only satisfaction for the poor people is to have these cybernetic or cyber enhancements, like almost like us having cell phones. I can't do this, but I got a cell phone.
Right.
So kind of going a little bit off that, Jeff,
Yes.
where do you see this genre when the next generation of writers comes in? Obviously, if you knew with a crystal ball, you'd be writing it now, but where do you see these people, the next generation of writers, coming in with their keyboards, tablets, Air? I don't know what they're going to be typing on or writing with at that point. What do you want to see?
To be honest, like one of my favorite, and I don't know if Nicole, you consider this cyberpunk or not, but Stephen Barnes is Street Lethal, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That
was the second Black science fiction book that I read, and he wrote that in the 80s.
80s, yeah.
Right. So for me, I don't see us doing, or not us, right? I know I'm still being a writer. All of us are still going to be writing, but I'm talking about the next generation, right? So I see them still doing what we're doing, because I think if there is something after technology, right? It would be a different genre. So like what all is technology, because like I have stories where they laugh at people who travel through space in physical ships, because I think that is a very fundamental way to travel through space. I think you can do it metaphysically. We just don't know how to do it yet. And to us right now, that's magic, right? But in the future, it may be science, and that would make a cell phone obsolete, because you could just think somebody and talk to them in your mind, and you won't even need a cell phone. So I think we are like, our tools for technology will shape and bend a little bit, but we've outlined enough. So even if you read Logan's Run, right, or if what's another good old, just Stephen Barnes is one, right? It's very much like another book by Jason Saby called Body Slick, right? And Body Slick was published by Vibe magazine. It was supposed to take the hip hop world by storm. But when you look at it, it's Repo Men. He's almost like a drug dealer as opposed to a corporate guy working for the system. So the variables may change, but I think the tools will still be there, because the box around the genre is technology.
Milton?
I see that.
I think it's that's a good question. It's hard to say. Because somebody said we're living in a science fiction world now. A lot of the things that were imagined back in the day, we're living that now, and it's a matter of trying to, from a technological standpoint, trying to decide that or figure out where we're going to go next. Back in the day when I was really, really heavy into science, I would read these, I would get, Scientific America and stuff like that and read about these new technologies coming up. And I would sit there and try to extrapolate and say, okay, this is what this is now, but what can this develop into? Even with us cell phones today, we all talk about how that came from Star Trek having the communicator and people seeing that and saying, hey, I want to make one of those one day and actually end up doing it, although we kind of reached that point with the flip phone, but but I think from a technical standpoint, for me right now it would be hard to say. From a social standpoint, right now I think we're in a point as people of African descent and people of African American descent, is that it's very important that we tell stories that incorporate our history and our culture into it. That's why people got so excited about Watchmen. That's why they got so excited about Lovecraft Country, because in the midst of telling this horror story, we were also telling the stories about stuff that we went through as Black people in America, stories that, that are being brought to light because of these, because of these stories, basically. But I've also been seeing an undercurrent of younger authors and fans of the genre that are starting to say, I know these stories are important and I know they need to be told, but where are the stories where we're just heroes, and we're not dealing with deeper issues in every story that we write. We're dealing with stories that are just about a person going through something like that, or a hero fighting a certain situation that doesn't necessarily involve a cultural or something like that from that standpoint. And at first I would hear it every now and then, and I would kind of like say, you got a point there. We should be telling all kind of stories. The stories we're telling now are important. We need to be showing all aspects about who we are. But I'm starting to hear it more and more. And I'm like, well, it seems like there's a generation coming up and they're starting to they're starting to look for something different than what is being presented right now. And I think the next step for us creatively as African Americans and people of African descent is to move in that direction where we're still telling our stories and we're still incorporating our history and our culture, which I think we should, but then we'll also be telling stories where a person is like Sybil, where she's just solving mysteries, and so I think that's the direction that is starting to come up as far as storytellers are concerned, and as far as what readers want to see down the road and stuff. The technology part is really interesting because I used to work with a company that we made products for repairing circuit boards and stuff like that. And one of the biggest issues that we run with when we're dealing with miniaturization is, how do you dissipate heat? That's the biggest issue with computers, is that the smaller you get, the different types and you're getting smaller, but the circuits are actually becoming more numerous. And the further the electricity has to travel, the more heat is generated. So the big, and then you start to get into stuff that's so small that it's starting to be affected by atomic forces, like Brownian movement and different things like that. So it's like, and there was a discussion about, okay, every year we want to buy a new cell phone because that cell phone gets better. But what happens when we reach the limit of technology? Then why do you want to buy another cell phone if it's not going to be better than the one you bought 5 years ago?
Right.
And so I think that's one of the things that, we look at. One of the things that I, because of this is kind of a side note about the heat thing. One of the things that I put in one of my stories about androids is because androids are have circuit boards and stuff in there. And the way you tell the difference between an android that looks totally human and a human is that the android's temperature is always a little bit higher because of the circuits and everything like that. The heat sinks and everything has to do. So a person may be 98.6, but an android temperature may naturally be like 105 because of the technology inside of it. So the way you scan something to decide whether somebody's an android or human is you run their temperature. And so, okay, that person's 105 degrees, they're an android, that kind of thing. So I think it's, the technology is interesting. I really wish I knew where it was going, but I think that part is interesting.
Buy some stocks in certain areas. So
I think Ghost in the Shell showed a good example, and I thought about that too. Is that you get to the point where you cannot manufacture the circuit small enough, so you actually have to grow an android.
Yep.
And, just like we have DNA that determines how we grow. In the future, you may have like manufactured DNA that determines how the android grows. You know,
But okay,
grow it. You know, instead of trying to build it, you just put it. Put it in a situation where you have all the components, maybe in a liquid form, and it basically forms the android based on the artificial genetic code that you've created to develop that android.
I like your vision. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that? But I would also say in the Android conversation world, the augmentation world also comes into conversation with that. You know, not just for looks, but you see the what was the guy that did the little commercial where he did the 6 finger, so you could type with 6 fingers, stuff like that.
It's Jeff Goldblum, right? And it's like an apartment.com commercial. It looked just like it was straight out of Ghost in the Shell. Milton, have you seen it? Because all the little women are sitting at the keyboards and they all have like 6 fingers and they're all like typing like androids, right? It's kind of neat.
But that's exactly it. That's exactly, you develop, you basically sit down and write a code of how you want this particular android to grow.
Now,
and then you grow it basically,
The other question is too, do we get so automated that we end up like the kid in the beginning of WALL-E? I don't know if y'all remember, if you've seen the movie WALL-E, but he was so automated that he didn't need to do anything except eat. And it almost reminded you of that other movie, Gamer. Not Gamer. What was the other one? Oh my God, where everybody used avatar people.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. Everybody just stayed in the house and the avatar.
That is surrogates. The surrogates.
Surrogate. Yeah.
I have the comics.
Yeah.
So that was I like the detective ones. So that's what that one was, right? It was a whodunit.
Right.
But yeah, everyone stayed inside and they just used surrogates to go out. And they were freaking out, like, what do you mean you want to go outside? Don't you ever use your surrogate? It's not safe. And the artificial bodies would go out and do things for them, so that they didn't have to leave.
And that almost exists now when you think about how people use the internet now.
Or DoorDash, right?
Right. Nobody leaves. Like,
people stay on the internet all day. They have friends like we do on Facebook. You have friends all over the world that you never meet.
Yeah.
I've known people for 11, 12 years online.
Yes.
And not planning on meeting them, right?
Some of them I don't even know their real names. I just know the names that they use online. So those are like projections of like surrogate. Do you get to that? Those kind of questions are so interesting to me because, and most of the time, what I come up with, I don't like.
So that's all Black Mirror, right? I mean, Black Mirror takes technology that we have right now and presents it in. Here's how it would be if, right? And so they present the darker sides of technology. That's what Black Mirror does.
So it's also the question of how much. It's not so much how much do you do, but there's always a question: when do you stop? At what point do you develop a technology and say, okay, you know what, we're not going to do that?
Okay, have you seen the dogs from what's that place called? It's the Boston group.
DARPA. No, Boston Dynamics.
Boston Dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've seen
Okay,
those things, you know.
what are y'all doing? Did y'all not watch a Terminator movie? I don't understand. Like seriously, you're literally trying to develop this for what purpose?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I actually put those in my book, Government's Peace. I actually put them in there. 'Cause, you know, the
I
guy
saw
has
that.
two of
Yes.
them. They're dogs, basically. And they do all this stuff like that, you know. So he, you know, they're beat up and stuff. But you know, that's the question. At what point do you say, okay, this we can do this, but
We shouldn't do this. It's
Right.
it's the Dr. Frankenstein question, right? I'm sorry, Cersei, go ahead.
It reminds me of the movie Forbidden Planet, where they find the machine that the aliens had, where they could instantaneously produce something out of energy.
Yep.
But they forgot that, along with their frontal lobe, their subconscious went with it, and they were jealousy and hate, and it created
All
a
those
monster
id.
that killed everybody in one night. So
Yep. That
I like to argue those theories, especially when they produce such nightmares for people like Milton. I remember when I had right, so I had my class read Lord of the Flies.
Yep.
And everybody was so hung up on Lord of the Flies, and I said, "Well, do you know they really had this happen in the world, and the kids didn't kill each other?
Mhm.
What we've been sold is a negative propaganda on human ability to elevate. So when I think of AI, I don't think of Terminator, right, or Vicky from iRobot, because that can't be intelligence, right? That's artificial, but it's not intelligence, because intelligence would figure out a way for us to solve global warming, would figure out a way to be charismatic like the Dalai Lama or whoever peace person we know. They know those people too, and they would know how to talk us down and be intelligent about it, as opposed to saying there's no solution except for total domination, so I have to get all the guns and we have to control humans because humans don't know how to control themselves. I think that is not the reality.
and see, I disagree
read
because
a book where everybody's talking rationally.
I mean, if you have
Of
I mean,
course.
they've done studies with AIs, and the AIs have taught themselves new languages. They've also like in surrogates, they did not start off as being vehicles for everyone to not go outside. The guy who invented surrogates were for people who couldn't walk,
Right.
to be able to have a body, right? It went from being this very altruistic, benevolent tech to being something very horrendous.
And I think,
right.
I think that goes back.
Because in Alta Karma, they developed the chip, the disc, so people could travel through space.
Right.
But then people used it as a way to live forever.
Yep.
And
Okay.
that's why Quail Chris, who is the greatest character in the world, as far as I'm concerned, turned against her. Oh, I want to see a Quail Chris Falconer movie, man.
Right.
That's why she turned against the very technology that she created.
Yep.
Because she saw how it was corrupted to be something that it wasn't supposed to be.
So my point was for Jeff was I don't think it starts out, the tech doesn't start out being this way, right? It starts out with this very benevolent reasoning, right? A way to resolve issues. Sting said it best. In one of his songs, he said, "I haven't seen a miracle of science that didn't turn out to be right, something horrible." So
it's garbage in, garbage out, like we used to say back in the day. Because even right now, they've shown studies that you have artificial intelligence that shows racial bias.
Yes, that's what I was thinking about earlier. Yes,
because how it's been programmed by the people who are actually putting the information in.
Yes,
right.
You have to have a diverse group of people working on the technology. So when somebody says, you know what, you got this sensor where it only recognizes people with dark skin, because that person that may be programming it is not even thinking about that, or they may be thinking about that. Right. So you have to have that diverse input to make sure that somebody's there to catch that. And I think Jeff has a point.
He does.
You could program something to where it would be altruistic and it will be benevolent, but that all depends on the person that's, or the people who are sitting there writing that program and what they think is essential to shepherding or monitoring a human society.
Okay, here, I'll do you one better. I love Black Mirror as much as I can, but I still like action more. So therefore, I love Love, Death, and Robots, okay? And so one of my favorite stories there is Zima Blue, okay? There's an example of AI that when you put in the question, what is good, what is bad, it will figure it out aside from the programming of what is good and what is bad, and come back with productive and counterproductive, which is a little bit more scientific. So like I said, I think short changing what intelligent is based on inputted information as opposed to scientific reasoning, which would out-reason racial bias. But because we haven't really created an intelligence that's artificial, even the robots that created their own language were just playing tic-tac-toe. They weren't really playing a next level math. They were just doing subtraction, right? They weren't going to another level because, again, even human languages are more complicated than certain languages that humans speak. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah, I see that.
Again, I can talk with my hands. That's a language. You understand?
Yeah.
And I think this goes back. I think this goes back to what Milton was saying. With technology, we had the option of letting computers shorten our workday or increase it, and we've increased it at this point. Same thing with the AI. You know, we have the option of focusing on making AI that is better than us, or you know, has the failings of the programmer, and we either aren't there yet or aren't able to make that shift. So we've actually run out of time at this point. I think it's been a great discussion. I loved having you guys here. Just quickly, let's go around the room again and have everyone tell us where you can be found. And we'll start with you, Milton.
Okay, I'm Milton Davis. You can find me at www.mvmediaatl.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Obadoro, Obadoro, and on Facebook, I'm there, just Milton Davis. Keep looking till you see my face because there's like over 900 Miltons on Facebook. And I'm also on Twitter as the Griot with the T, because the Griot without the T is actually the Griot's thing that's owned by NBC, and I always get tagged a lot in their stuff.
All right, Nicole.
You can find, I'm Nicole Kurtz. You can find me at mochamemoirspress.com on Twitter. My Twitter handle is actually in my nameplate here, and you can find me at NicoleGivensKurtz.net.
All right, Ceres.
You can find me on Facebook at Ceres Wright, on Twitter at Ceres Wright, Instagram Ceres Wright. My website is kceres.net, and Dwasif at dwasif.org, dwasf.org.
Perfect. Finally, Jeff.
I'm complicated. So I like to just say, I haven't synced it all yet. So Jeff Carroll on Amazon, under my author page, you'll find all of my books. Find any one of my book titles or even some of the books that I have stories in, and then click Jeff Carroll and you'll find the rest of my stuff. And for my comic books, you kind of have to just hit me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And my email is coachyojeff@gmail, and that will bring up my name on Facebook. And so I'm Coach Yo Jeff on Instagram and Twitter, and that's it.
All right, perfect. I do want to thank all you guys for coming in, and thank everyone for watching. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.